today is the second half of the story. Maybe even the third half if you go back to Numbers 21, the Old Testament that Barbara read for us today. In Numbers, the people were bitten by snakes. Some of them died and some were dying. And Moses didn't know quite what to do. But he knew enough to go to God. And so God said to Moses, make a snake, put it on a pole, and whoever looks at it will be healed, will be saved. And that's what happened. So that's the reference that John makes as we opened up the gospel reading today. Now, we'll look back at this a little bit later, but the image for John in the gospel is the image of Jesus being raised on a cross, and he identifies it back to that experience in Exodus. For John, Jesus is saying, I am the good snake. I am the good slitherer. That's not the word I was looking for. Serpent, there we go. I want my hour back. It just And so the image that he starts out with is that image from Numbers. Okay. I'll be right with you. Now the other thing to remember about today's lesson is that it's the second half of a conversation. The first half is in the first part of the third chapter of the Gospel of John. Jesus has a conversation with, do you remember who? Nicodemus. Nicodemus came to him at night. Nicodemus was a leader of the Jews, and many of the Jews were a little bit angry at Jesus at this point. And so Nicodemus came at night in darkness. Nick says to Jesus, we know you're from God. Now, he doesn't come and say, I know you're from God. He says, we know you're from God. There are others, leaders of the Jews, who sense there's something about Jesus. And so Nicodemus comes at night so that others don't see, so he doesn't get in trouble by those who are annoyed with Jesus. But also in the Gospel of John, anytime he talks about dark, he's not always talking about time of day or time of night. He's talking about those who just don't get it. They are in the dark, literally. That's how John sees that. So, one of the questions that Nicodemus brings for us in this gospel is, are you willing to go to Jesus in your darkness? Are you willing to bring your brokenness, your pain, your hurt, the reality of who you are you willing to bring that to Jesus? In today's passage, it's about a new kingdom. Well, it's about an old kingdom, but it's one that Jesus calls people to anew. Everyone is invited. And like with the snake that's lifted up, each one needs to see for themselves. You can't come to Jesus for somebody else. You can point the direction, but they have to look for themselves, just like with the snake. Each one has to find it for herself or himself. The invitation is from God, and it's not just for that one who's living in darkness, but it is for whosoever. It's all about God's love for us and for everyone. That should be a joyful thing, don't you think? Yeah, it should. That's kind of what I want you to focus on today. Be joyful in the faith. There's an old Dennis the Menace cartoon where Dennis and Joey are coming out of the Wilson's house. Both have handfuls of cookies. And Joey says to Dennis, I wonder what we did to deserve this. Dennis, being a bright young man, said, Joey, Mrs. Wilson didn't give us cookies because we're nice. She gave us cookies because she's nice. That's what the grace of God is. It's not about us being nice. It's about God being nice. We don't usually talk about God being nice, do we, Braxton? We usually talk about it in other ways, but for this, it works. It's about God. It's about love. It's about grace. Something we don't earn. Max Lucado tells a story in his book, A Gentle Thunder, about a friend of his who went to Disney World. And he had something happen that was just so amazing, and he had to tell Max about it. He was in Cinderella's castle. Lots of kids around, as you can imagine. And all of a sudden, everyone shifted to one side of the castle. He said if it was a boat, it would have tipped over. It was Cinderella. She came in. And all the kids wanted to be touched and to touch her. And his friend told him that she was typecast perfectly. She was a beautiful young lady, clear complexion, her hair was just, every hair was in its place. She was just perfect. So all the kids scrambled around her. Well, his friend Kenny happened to look at the other side, which was empty except for one little boy and his brother. This little boy was, he said, probably 7 or 8. It was hard to determine his age because of his disfigurement. He was dwarfed in height, his face was deformed, and he stood quietly and wistfully, holding the hand of his big brother. Max said, "Don't you know what he wanted? He wanted to be with the other children. He longed to be in the middle of the kids, reaching out for Cinderella, calling her name. But can't you feel his fear? The fear of yet another rejection. It was just too much for him to deal with. Don't you wish Cinderella would go to him? Guess what? She did. She did. She noticed the little boy. Immediately she started walking in his direction, politely but firmly walking through this sea of children until she broke free. She came face to face with him. She knelt down so that she was at eye level with him. To this stunned little boy, she kissed his cheek. That disfigured little boy was me. That disfigured little boy was you. Jesus comes and gives us that kiss. When was a time when you felt unlovable and then God's love came to you? What did that feel like? There should be great joy there. Nicole. I have a video that I wanted to share with you that makes this very point. It's from a wonderful movie. The movie is Awakenings, has Robin Williams in it. And the story is, it's a true story. There's what they call sleeping sickness. And so people would be essentially comatose for decades. And that's the ward that he finds himself on. And he happens to try this new medicine. And surprisingly, it works. People have been comatose for decades, come to life. And this is Leonard, who was one of those.
Hello?
Hello? Dr. Sayre? Dr. Sayre, I've got to talk to you.
Leonard?
Yes. I think it's important. Some things were said. Well, I've just got to talk to you.
What kind of things?
Well, things that matter, things that have happened to me, things that I've come to understand. Things.
Where are you calling from, Leonard?
Your office.
It's very late.
Is it?
Leonard, you stay there. I'll be right over.
Good.
Leonard? Leonard?
Dr. Sayre, sit down. Sit down.
Why? What's wrong?
We've got to tell everybody. We've got to remind them. We've got to remind them how good it is.
How good what is, Leonard?
Everything's good. What does it say? It's all bad. It's all bad. People have forgotten what life is all about. They've forgotten what it is to be alive. They need to be reminded. They need to be reminded about what they have and what they can lose. And what I feel is the joy of life, the gift of life, the freedom of life, the wonderment of life.
When we become the whosoever, isn't that the kind of joy we should have? Shouldn't we say to each other, tell them, shouldn't they know? In Jesus, God offers God's himself to us. Jesus is the invitation. In fact, John may have said, I am the invitation. In the Middle Ages, there was a nun who claimed to have talked to Jesus face to face. She talked to her bishop about it, and he was somewhat skeptical. He said, "Sister, did you talk to him?" She said, "Yes, I did." He said, "Well, next time if you talk to him, I want you to ask him, what was the bishop's great sin before he became bishop? Because only God would know that." So she said, "Okay." A couple of months later, she came back. She said, "I saw Christ again." He said, "Did you ask him a question about the bishop's sin?" She said, "Yes, I did." "And what did he say?" He said, "I don't remember anymore." There's grace. The past doesn't matter. There's joy in a new start. We have received Christ, and we, like Christ, are called to offer God to others. We need to tell them. An elderly man was dying in the hospital. He had no family nearby, but he kept asking for his son. So someone at the nurse's station did some checking and found out that he had a son who was in boot camp in South Carolina. And so they contacted the boot camp and asked if they could send his son to the hospital. So when this young Marine got to the hospital, the nurse met him, took him into the room. He sat next to the man and he held his hand. Not a word was exchanged between them. They just sat there together. And at dawn, he passed away gently. And as that Marine started to leave, he stopped by the nurse's station and he said, "Who was that?" The nurse said, "I thought he was your father." She said, why did you stay there?" He said, "Well, when I got there, I saw that he was dying, and I realized they found the wrong Marine. But I knew he was dying, and I knew he needed a son. So I stayed with him." When we have received, we need to give. Shouldn't they know? Just as there is joy in being the whosoever, there is joy in carrying that message to others. Fred Craddock was a great teacher of preachers and a great preacher himself. He passed away, I think, last week. He tells the story about his father who spent his life hiding from God, who was seeking him out. He said, "When the pastor used to come from my mother's church to call on him, my father would say, 'You don't care about me. I know how churches are. You want another pledge, another name. Get another name, get another pledge.' He said, my nervous mother would run to the kitchen crying for fear someone's feelings were hurt. When we had an evangelist come to her church, the pastor would always bring him to my father's house and would say, 'Get it, sick it.' My father would always say the same thing. 'You don't care about me. Another name, another pledge. I know about churches.' Fred said, 'I must have heard that 1,000 times. But one time he didn't say it. He was at the Veterans Hospital. He was down to 74 pounds. They'd taken out his throat and inserted a metal tube. They said to him, 'Mr. Craddock, cancer is just, it's too late. We can give you some radium, but there's not much else we can do.' Fred said, when I went to see him, in every window, potted plants and flowers. In every place there was to set them, potted plants and flowers. Even on the tray that they bring over the bed was a large plant. And by the bed was a stack of 10 or 15 inches deep cards. And I want to tell you is that every card, every blossom, every potted plant from groups, Sunday school classes, women's groups, youth groups, Bible classes, from my mother's church, every one of them. My father saw me reading and he couldn't speak, but he took a Kleenex box and he wrote something on the side from Shakespeare's Hamlet. He wrote, "In this harsh world, draw your breath tell my story. He said, "What's your story, Daddy?" And he wrote, "I was wrong." It's not until we know God is seeking us in love, not condemnation. It's not until that moment that we really know the good news, Jesus Christ. Look up. Find Christ. Rejoice. Rejoice. Now, as we remember the many, many times